One of the things I make the most is skirts. I just can't get enough, which is quite funny because before I actually started to sew, I never really wore skirts. There just wasn't anything out there in the shops for me. But then I started sewing and learning about dress history and found a wealth and variety of styles and pinpointed exactly what worked for me. And then I made like 10 of them. 10 might be an exaggeration, but all of this to say that I know my way around a skirt. And so I wanted to share some tips on how to make any skirt look or feel vintage without actually being so. It can be very hard to find the right style and, for me in particular, the right size of vintage skirts. But with these tips, you can also take a modern shop bought or secondhand skirt and make it look more vintage. I know that at the moment there is a lot out there about buying, secondhand, but in particular buying vintage. But it's very hard sometimes to find, true vintage things from the 20th century, to find them in a variety of styles and sizes that can fit everyone. If you're not a standard size or if you're not a small or medium, it can be very hard. I've really struggled with this. I haven't really found any vintage skirts that would fit me. But with these tips, you can adapt that. You can buy secondhand, modern skirts secondhand, and make them feel more vintage. And so I also wanted to use 2 skirts that I made recently as examples. So I've got some tips today that should help you to shop, make, or alter skirts to have a more timeless feel. Point number 1 is fabrics. Now, I'm not going to bore you with fiber analysis. At this point, I think we all know that natural fibers, things like cotton, linen, wool, are better for your own personal experience, but also obviously for the planet. However, especially when buying secondhand, be it skirts or fabrics, sometimes it's hard to determine the actual fiber content. So instead, I wanted to focus on weight and drape. This is directly connected to the design or type of skirt you want. The weight and drape of the fabric will affect how the skirt sits or flows around your body. If you're looking for a 1930s pencil style fabric, the skirts that are very tailored to your body, then you want something more densely woven and sturdier that can hold its shape well. You want something that if it's pressed, if you want something with pleats, then you want something that can hold the pleat. When you press it down, it stays that way. But if you're looking for something with swish, then a lighter fabric will flow around your body when twirling. So for example, if you want sort of a circle skirt, we'll get to circle skirts in a second, but if you want a skirt that has a big hem that sits quite limp against your body, then you want a lighter fabric that sort of flows down. If you want it to stand away from your body and have structure, then you need something that is more densely woven and can hold its shape. That's not necessarily heavier, but it's also to do just how densely the fabric is woven and it can hold its shape. So when you're picking a skirt or a fabric for a skirt, have a feel. Pick up the textile, text how it hangs and moves. I also like slightly scrunching it in my hands and seeing if it bounces back or holds its shape. That's a good sign that it will hold a pleat or work well for a more tailored design. Speaking of design, this is point number 2. Now there is so much that can be said about design that I could be talking for hours, but I wanted to give you 3 basics to think about, particularly in the context of vintage style skirts. The way I see it, and please this is just a simplified version, there's 3 basic types of skirts: a circle skirt, a rectangle skirt, or a panelled fitted skirt. This is a very simplified description of them, but I'm sure you'll recognize all of them when you see them. A circle skirt is exactly what it sounds like. The fabric is cut all together in a continuous circle, or sometimes with seams, with a hole in the middle where the waist is. Well, maybe it should be called a donut skirt, but that's exactly what it looks like. This type of skirt requires maths, ew. But with a straightforward calculation based on your waist radius, the length of your skirt, as well as the type of volume you'd like, you can get it done. However, the good news is there's dozens of calculators online that can help you with this, and I'll link an example down below. This type of skirt is iconic of the 1950s false skirts and works really well for full swishy styles, and depending on your fabric, it can stand away from the body or it can be quite close fitting. The second, the rectangle skirt, it's a much simpler type, exactly as it sounds. It's a rectangle of fabric which is then pleated or gathered to fit your waist measurement. It's one of the easiest styles of skirt to make, and I find particularly when making small, narrow pleats, it tends to look timeless. There are countless of patterns out there for this, but you can also just use the calculators I mentioned in drafting instructions. I cover this in my modern Victorian video, which I'll link down below. Lastly, the panelled or fitted skirt. This type of skirt has endless possibilities, but basically, instead of having one rectangle of fabric to pleat down to your size, you have shaped trapezoid pieces, which when put together will fit closer to the body. This means that depending on how much you shape those seams, you take in or let out, you can achieve pretty much any shape. Most Victorian skirts from the 1860s onwards are like this. If you hear of things like 5 gores or 7 gores or 9 gore skirts, this is what it means. A gore is a panel. In this specific case, because gores can also be other things, but when they refer to 7 gores, typical skirt, that's what they mean. It's a skirt with 7 panels. And so because this is really common type of Victorian skirt, you'll find them everywhere on my channel. But I've also introduced them to more modern dresses, like my pinafore dress, which is still one of my most worn dresses ever, or even more whimsical designs like my witch dress, just has a basic panelled skirt, which is actually from an altered Victorian pattern. But also, for example, this 1940s simplicity pattern, 2624, has shaped panels which make quite a fitted skirt. So you can see there's lots of possibilities here, and altogether these 3 types of skirt provide different looks. So when you're out shopping, think about what you want and look for seams. You can always take these in to shape the skirt as well. I've made a Pinterest board with dozens of 20th century style skirts, and then some a little bit earlier, as inspiration, and I'll leave the link down below. But have a look, find some inspiration, there's so much out there. But if you find a secondhand skirt that has seams, just keep in mind that you can take these in. It's much harder to let them out, but you can take them in, or you can add things in the seams to change the shape. These were the 2 main fundamental points that I wanted to bring up about skirts. The rest are smaller details that can be added to skirts, whether newly made or bought, to make them look more vintage style. And this is where inspiration can be really helpful. Sometimes it can be hard to know where to start when looking for resources, but I really like Pinterest. It's just so easy to browse. So I've made that board, and I've got some examples here for you. So one of the points I wanted to bring up, point number 3, is length. You'll find that most vintage skirts are at least from the knee down. Some 1930s styles sit very well on the knee, while others are calf or T length, and if you prefer a more Victorian or Edwardian look, you can also go for ankle or floral length. But you'll notice that even when I make my sort of more modern day-to-day wear Victorian style skirts, I keep them at the ankle because I don't actually prefer full length skirts. I don't like things rubbing on the ground. So that's a personal preference, but don't forget that you can take historical inspiration and then adapt it to your own needs. Now, if you find a skirt you love that is too short, you could try adding a flounce or hem extension. There's ways around it. I did this for my most recent skirt make. It's a circle skirt, but my fabric was too narrow to make it the length I wanted. So I ended up cutting wide strips of fabric on the bias, seaming them, and then sewing them to the bottom edge of the skirt as a sort of extension to make it a better length for me. I've just found I don't wear short skirts as much, and so this way it meant I could still use the fabric from my stash, but make it work for me. But this can also be a design opportunity. If you use a contrasting fabric or decorate it with trim or lace, or even if you make it a gathered flounce, where the strip of fabric is larger than the bit you're attaching it to, and then it's gathered down to fit it, it can look really nice. In this example, Simplicity Pattern 3791, it's technically a pinafore pattern with a shut underneath, but they have made a scalloped hem on a gathered skirt and then added a contrasting fabric flounce, which looks really cute. This other pattern, Simplicity 1166, you can see the skirt has a gathered flounce added, and an even smaller one on Simplicity 2580, a 1940s pattern. So adding a flounce is a really good way to add length to a skirt, especially if it's a store-bought new skirt or, a secondhand skirt that is just too short. You can find a complementary or contrasting or even similar fabric and add a flounce to make it a better length for you. Similarly, if a skirt is too long, you can rehem it just to change it to the right length, or you can also use tucks where there is a visible fold of the extra fabric. When these are arranged, often in 3, it can give a really historical look to a skirt. There's so many opportunities here. I did this in my most recent skirt, the one with the flounce. Just tuck hides the seam of the flounce, and I quite like that. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough length to add more tucks because I think it would look nicer with clusters of tucks, but alas, I think it's still a nice detail. There are also a few features that you can find on vintage skirts that aren't really made on modern skirts anymore, but that you can add to your sewing plans or even to already made or end finished skirts. One of my absolute favorites is patched pockets. Patched pockets on vintage patterns often were the only real design feature on a plain skirt. You can see them throughout so many different examples. But it's an opportunity to add some interest as well as functionality in a matching or contrasting fabric. Some of them also have details such as shaped flaps. I've added so many examples to the Pinterest board, so ensure you take a look. Here's a few examples with big square patched pockets, rounded ones with little buttons. There's also loads of examples of inseam pockets or just slit pockets. These are much harder to do on a finished skirt, but a lot of them have fun shaped flaps or other bits to add some interest. But do keep in mind that you can technically add pockets to anything, and it's much easier if you're making them a design feature rather than trying to make them invisible. Adding things like a shaped flap or something is a good way to hide that this wasn't original to the skirt, but it adds some interest and it makes it fit a bit more seamless, or like an intentional addition. Another feature I found consistently is shaped waistbands. These can really change another plain skirt into something different, and they can be used to reinforce particular design choices or silhouettes of a time period. So typically what you'll find on skirts is that you'll have just a straight piece of a rectangle, and that's the waistband. Very simple, nothing else to it. However, you can add some shape to this, you can add details, and that really can change up the skirt. For example, in the Edwardian period, it was very common to wear a skirt, shirt waist or blouse, and then a triangular belt, often pointed downwards, to really reinforce a triangular shape in the waist. However, if you think about it, if you shape your skirt waistband to already be in a triangle, you don't have to add the belt, but it mimics the silhouette of the time period without needing additional pieces. And you can do this for modern skirts as well. If you have a panelled skirt, a gathered skirt, just adding that little detail can give that timeless feel. I also found quite a few 1940s and 1950s patterns with shaped waistbands. Actually, and I applied this to my most recent make, where I made a 1950s inspired curved waistband where it comes up at the top. I don't have any other skirt with this, so it's a really nice different feature. Lastly, I wanted to give a shout out to the humble button. Modern skirts rarely have these days, but you can add buttons to any skirt and instantly make it look more vintage. I often forget about it myself, but buttons don't actually need to be functional. They can be simply decorative, so you can add them anywhere to anything. So if you have a nice skirt you like, but it's too plain, you can always add a row of buttons down the center front or add some to the waistband. I've done this to many of my skirts. One of my absolute favorite skirts is this skirt that I'm wearing right now, which is actually a secondhand skirt I bought. I think it's from the 80s, but it has this waistband and then it has these little details here with these buttons, but these buttons are just decorative. They're not functional at all, and it's the only place on the skirt that has buttons, but I think they look really cute and makes it look way more timeless, and it just has buttons on there, nowhere else. But yeah, buttons are a great addition, and you can often find them in secondhand shops for really cheap, and usually they can be quite intriguing, and a really good way to use up, imagine if you only have 4 of a button, to add them as a decorative thing to an existing skirt. And I think that is all I wanted to say. I hope this video has helped give you some ideas of things you can look for or add to your next skirt, be it bought or self-made, to get the look you really want. I felt the frustration of not quite finding or making what I wanted, and I do have the tendency to just put it aside when it doesn't work, but sometimes investing just a little bit of time in scrap fabric or scrap buttons can make a garment that I didn't reach for, hopefully, into a new favorite. I will also collate a bunch of these resources, the calculators, the videos, the patterns, into a post on Patreon, so you can have an easy access to it, and I'll include also some more easily accessible patterns that can either have a vintage style or can be adapted. If you have some more vintage style ideas, please drop them down below in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And also, can you let me know, of the 3 types I mentioned, circle, rectangular or panelled, which is your favorite? Because I seem to really go between them. Some days I really love one, some days I really love the other. So I'm really curious if you have a particular favorite. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you very soon.